Just mention Karl Marx in conservative circles and you're going to get the bless your heart.
Must pray for forgiveness.
Maybe he's in his philosophy phase. Because for many conservative believers, when they think about Karl Marx, they think of atheism, communist oppression, and a worldview that is seen as fundamentally at odds with Christianity. However, in this video, we're going to see that Karl Marx's critical analysis of capitalism, his passionate concern for human suffering, and then his radical vision of human liberation are actually more compatible with conservative Christian teachings than we may think. And I believe they represent a crucial prophetic challenge to being a Christian in the 21st century. And so, rather than an enemy of the faith, perhaps Marx offers a lens for us to re-examine faith in the context of social change. Now, to understand his relevance to Christianity, we need to get rid of the caricature of him as this simplistic, angry atheist who always wanted his name in lowercase letters because he didn't believe in capitals. Okay, I made that last part up. But Marx emerged from a Jewish family that had a rich intellectual tradition. And so when we think about his critique of religion, it's far more sophisticated than simply dismissing it. Now, some of you are probably thinking about Marx's famous quote, right? That religion is the opium of the people. But when he said that, he wasn't attacking genuine spiritual experience. He was critiquing religious institutions that pacify the oppressed and discourage systemic change. In fact, Marx's critique of religion, it resembles the prophetic tradition within both Judaism and also Christianity. That when we read the books of Jeremiah or Amos and hear things like, may justice roll like water. These prophets are challenging institutional corruption, and what they're doing is that they're calling out for social injustice. And the biblical prophets, over and over, consistently condemned economic exploitation, denounced the wealthy who gained their wealth by oppressing the poor, and they demanded social transformation. And Marx's analysis, it follows this similar prophetic lineage, arguing that religious institutions often serve power structures instead of challenging them. And when we look at the center of Marx's work, there is this profound concern for human dignity and economic justice. Again, these are themes that resonate deeply with biblical teachings. The Gospel of Luke in particular presents Jesus as a radical economic revolutionary. Mary's prophetic song, it declares that God what? Has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. You can find this in Luke chapter 1. And Marx's fundamental insight was that economic systems, regardless, they profoundly shape human relationship and potential for good, but also for bad. And when economic structures systematically exploit workers, alienate them from the fruits of their labor, and concentrate wealth in the hands of a few, they fundamentally contradict the biblical vision of human flourishing. The early Christian community, and you can read about them in the book of Acts, following the resurrection, we see how they lived. And how did they live? Well, they shared everything in common, and they gave to anyone who had anything in need. You can find that in Acts chapter 4. And that bears a striking resemblance to Marx's idea of collective ownership and mutual care. And so even from a capitalist perspective, when we look at the history of economics, we find that when unions are weakest, the economy tends to decline. When the wealth distribution is increasingly not fair and equitable, the economy declines. When these things happen, suffering increases for those who are oppressed. And I say that as someone who does believe in a capitalist system. I think one of Marx's most profound contributions is his concept of alienation. And it's the way capitalist economic societies tend to separate workers from the meaning and value of their labor. And so in a capitalist system, workers do not own the products they create, do not control the means of production. And so the subtle progression is that they simply become mere commodities themselves. And this is why you're expected to give a 2-week notice before leaving a job. But if you're fired, you're told to pack your office and leave, and you might even get escorted out. It's why many organizations, and unfortunately including large churches, they'll make you sign a non-compete. And this systematic dehumanization, it stands in direct contradiction to the Christian understanding that human beings, we are created in God's image with inherent dignity and also creative potential. Now, of course, like all things, it's very nuanced. Like, there are plenty of organizations that are capitalist and they don't operate like this at all. But I would imagine, if you're still watching, that probably has not been the case for a lot of the places you've worked at. I know it hasn't been for me. And what Christian theology asserts is that humans are co-creators with God, that deep inside of them, they're meant to create meaningful work that reflects divine creativity. Arthur Brooks, in his book, The Conservative Heart, How to Build a Fair, Happier, and More Prosperous America, and he's speaking as a conservative, and he tells us that the conservative message, it should center on people's aspirations, dignity, and potential. That we should have a society that really leans into creating meaningful work and creating spaces where people can flourish. So Marx's critique reveals how capitalist systems can lead not always to work moving from a source of fulfillment, but actually into a mechanism of oppression. And by highlighting this alienation, he's providing Christians with a framework for understanding how economic systems can either support or undermine human dignity. Biblical teachings are clear about the spiritual dangers of wealth concentration. Jesus himself talked about money a lot, declaring that it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, than for a rich person to enter God's kingdom. Now, this text is not attacking someone who has wealth. Rather, the question becomes, how did you come by the wealth? What did it take for you to acquire the riches? In Jesus' context, many of those who were wealthy, they acquired that on the backs of those they oppressed. A prime example that he corrects a lot are tax collectors, who taxed more than they should, and then they would keep the rest for themselves. And people were already taxed at an oppressive amount. And so in my context of the United States, the richer you are, the easier it becomes to avoid taxes, to inevitably place that burden on others. And so Marx's analysis of capitalism tendency to concentrate wealth in the hands of a few, it provides a systemic explanation for this spiritual warning. And in the United States, many economists are likening the 2020s as a second Gilded Age. Why? Because the gap between the rich and the poor is rapidly increasing. And with this, the disappearance of the middle class. And what we end up with is the potential that you could have two vastly different American experiences. And the prophetic tradition of the Old Testament consistently denounced economic inequality. Amos thundered against those who sell the innocent for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. And so Marx's analysis, it provides a theoretical framework for understanding how systemic injustices are perpetrated through economic structures. And so if you're a Christian and you're seeking to take these biblical mandates seriously, that doesn't mean you embrace all of Marx's ideas. In fact, I don't think you should. But it is worth seriously engaging with his approach and with his insights. Central to Marx's philosophy is the concept of solidarity. It's the idea that human liberation is collective, not individual. And this principle, it aligns profoundly with the Christian understanding that we are the body of Christ, that we are saved into a community. The Apostle Paul, he declares in 1 Corinthians 12:26, if one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. And that resonates deeply with Marx's vision of collective human flourishing. And Marx argued that true human freedom, it requires dismantling systems of oppression and creating economic structures that support universal human dignity. Now, in Marx's approach, he focused on the plight of the working class. However, as advocated by thinkers like Arthur Brooks, conservatives should be helping the poor by creating systems that enable human dignity and upward mobility through free markets. And so focusing on addressing inequality, we're empowering individuals to flourish within a market system. Here's the deal. Both of these approaches are highlighting the need to address economic inequality to ultimately improve the lives of those who find themselves at the bottom of society. And this vision, it's not far removed from the biblical concept of shalom, a comprehensive peace and encompassing social, economic, and all spiritual dimensions. For Christians, engaging with Marx, it's going to offer several insights. First is systemic sin. Marx helps us understand that evil operates not just through individual actions, but through economic and social structures. And so this expands the Christian understanding of sin beyond personal morality, while it certainly includes that, but also institutional and systemic forms of oppression. And I would argue that those forms of sin are really what we suffer more from. The second thing we're going to gain is practical solidarity. See, he challenges Christians to move beyond charitable giving towards structural transformation. Because true Christian love requires addressing root causes of poverty and inequality, not merely providing temporary relief. And to use the biblical language, that it would be on earth as it is in heaven. And then economic ethics. Marx provides a framework for critically examining economic systems through a theological lens, encouraging Christians to ask, how do economic practices align with the biblical values of justice, dignity, and mutual care? Now, I think it's imperative to note that engaging Karl Marx does not mean uncritically adopting communist ideology. Because as we've seen throughout history, that does not work, nor does it lead to human flourishing. If anything, much of his methodology really led to human suffering. Rather, here's the value, I think. Karl Marx provides us a critical analysis and a philosophical framework. It's not a detailed blueprint for social and economic organization. Again, his blueprint failed miserably. But as Christians, I think what we can do is we can appreciate his insights while maintaining theological, economic, and practical differences. Moreover, Karl Marx himself, he recognized that religion has the potential for, yes, oppression, but also for liberation. That he saw religious impulses as expressions of human yearning for meaning and also justice. Karl Marx matters to Christians because he offers a prophetic challenge to complacent faith. It is a call that we would reimagine economic relationships through the lens of human dignity, solidarity, and divine love. And so he invites believers to take seriously the radical economic teachings of Jesus, which consistently prioritize the marginalized and challenge systemic oppression. By engaging Marx's thoughts, as Christians, we can rediscover a more transformative understanding of our own faith, one that sees salvation not as purely individual spiritual transaction, but this comprehensive liberation of human potential that challenges economic systems when they degrade human dignity. Because the gospel is fundamentally about God's solidarity with the oppressed, God's commitment to justice, and the radical reimagining of the human community. And as Christians, we're called to be agents of transformation. We're not passive recipients. And so what Karl Marx does, whether he intended to or not, is provides a critical tool for that transformative work, to ask questions, to challenge structures that don't lead to the flourishing of all people. And that in the end, it would be on earth as it is in heaven.